Welcome back to the second episode in my little series of the conversion of our summer house into our Tiki bar, the Kursed Piranha number 2. In this episode we're going to look at the build that transformed it from this storage unit, more or less, into what's pretty much a nearly complete Tiki bar now. We're really close, so the first step for me was to work out how we were going to hang this chair from the beams. So we bought 2 more batons of wood, similar to the one that was already up on the ceiling, and bolted them all together just to give it some really sort of strong reinforcement, and also later ran a couple of batons down vertically underneath it as well to really reinforce it. I found that bracket on Amazon. It holds up to 350 kilos of weight, and fitted it, and then stained the triple baton as well as the others, the joists that were holding the ceiling up, as they will be partially exposed, and this stain kind of brought out the pattern in the wood, which looked really pretty. So moving on, once the bar area was all completely clear, it allowed us the opportunity to lay out our bar top, which is about 3 metres long. It's pine, 60 centimetres deep, and we'll be burning and staining it probably in episode 3. It also allowed us the opportunity to make sure that our fridge and our freezer and our 3 cabinets all fitted in here, which they did rather perfectly. I'm really pleased about that. We do swing around that fridge door in a later clip because it was facing the wrong way, but whilst I had all of the space, it was also a really good opportunity for me to get out most of my Tiki mugs that were all easily accessible, just to, well, have a look at them really, but also to check for any damage and make sure that they'd all survived the journey when we moved house a little while ago. So thankfully all but one Tiki mug made it, and unfortunately the one that didn't make the journey was my volcano sharer, which is now out of stock, so it's going to be a bit tricky to replace it, but I have glued it together. It just means it probably won't be used for the purposes of an actual drinks vessel in the future, but I'll put some lei or some fresh fruit in it, something like that. And then there was this other one here with the little flower on that's always been damaged, but I just couldn't bear to part with it, so I popped a little flower over the damaged section. My first step of the behind the scenes stuff that never gets seen was to add insulation to the walls and ceiling, and I did this using spray adhesive and foil backed bubble wrap insulation, which comes on a roll. It's very easy to cut, it's very easy to put up, and I find its insulation qualities to be really good, particularly for the British winter, and they don't come far into the actual cavity once you've got the rolls up, so it leaves plenty of space for the electrician, plenty of space for that little gap to be left there, which is the air that maintains the warmth. So we had to add a couple of extra batons as well, because ultimately we were going to be putting OSB on every single section of the walls, and then a lighter boarding on the ceiling. We didn't want the ceilings to be too heavy, but I added all of these strips of baton. It took forever. Both of us were working at it pretty much for 2 to 3 days solid, getting it to this state, which then meant that the electrician was able to come round, and he was in a position where he could put the first fit of the electrics up. After that, I started to work on the bamboo for the ceiling, and I bought 2 different types of bamboo. I bought one that was called tortoiseshell and one that was called Mystic Forest. And the Mystic Forest one is slightly green, as you can see here, and I wanted the contrast between the 2 different types so that it was, I suppose, a little bit more organic looking. I didn't want it to look too uniform, so I changed the direction that the bamboo ran in as well. So we had a day or so of just cutting the bamboo, cutting it into different lengths, different widths. There wasn't really much room for error, so it was a question of measure twice, cut once. We didn't make any mistakes, thankfully, and we purchased ourselves a new miter saw as well to help us make the process a lot quicker. So once the cuts were covered with the masking tape, it was relatively easy to cut without too much shredding. I then put the sections of the bamboo onto the ceiling with no nails. It was stuff that dried almost instantly, so pretty much as soon as I pressed it up onto the ceiling, it stuck in place, which I'm so grateful for, because my arms were absolutely killing me already. I was also needing to pull through the actual cables that the electrician had drilled holes for us in the first board, so we were able to do that relatively easily, just so that when he came back it made his life a little bit easier. But we had 20 lights on the ceiling in total, and I designed a little plan for him so he knew where they'd all go. I numbered them all as well, just to be on the safe side, and then left him to it, just because I didn't want to be under his feet whilst he was trying to concentrate on working out the lights. But he was able to do that pretty much in a couple of hours, get all the lights up and in place. So that evening we were able to come back into the bar and actually switch on the lights and see what it looked like all lit up, which I have a little bit of footage of coming up. But I was really pleased with how this turned out, particularly with the contrast of the bamboo. It makes it look just a little bit more decorative, I suppose. I did have some feedback from my Kursed Piranha number 1 when I put some pictures up online, and somebody said they can't wait to see it when I've done the ceiling, and I had actually done the ceiling, so I felt a little bit hurt about that. And this time I knew I was going to go a little bit more to town on the ceiling, make it something, you know, real sort of visual interest. So this is how it looked once the main lights were up. That's my colour changing puffer. I'm going to move him to the back of the room because everybody has hit their head on him when they've walked in the room, and the bulb has been hit so many times it doesn't work properly now. So I'm going to have to get a new bulb and put him somewhere where he's a little bit less in the way. But I was really pleased with how these all looked, and what it did was it then meant we were on a bit of a mission to get the ceiling complete. And what I did was put up maybe 20-25 hooks, which then allowed us to empty one of our other big boxes that had all of the ceiling decorations in it. So pufferfish, fishing floats, little bird nests, a couple of parrots on hoops and that sort of thing. So it meant that by the end of this day, getting the ceiling lights and bits and pieces, the ornaments up, we were able to empty maybe 3 boxes, which was less to carry in and out the whole time. The next step for me was to stain the floor. I just used a cheap wood stain, and we've got a carpet that is 2 metres by 3 metres, so the majority of the floor in the bar is going to be covered with it, so I wasn't too worried about really splashing out on the floor. But you can see here it's really impactful. I did a couple of coats of it, so I was pleased with that sort of dark chocolatey brown that it turned into, and I think the contrast with that and the colours in the rug is going to work really nicely. So the next bit of footage is just me getting my stuff back in the bar. Over the last few weeks it has rained constantly, like literally every time I've emptied the bar to do work in it, it started raining. So I think this was probably a little bit of footage from when I couldn't do anything else other than have a look and admire our progress so far. So yes, that's a British weather for you, unfortunately. So this is how the bar looked at night, all lit up. We spent a couple of evenings up here when the weather allowed us to, just soaking up the ambience. We fitted a couple of Alexas as well, so that we've got our music in there. And the environment just feels really nice already. It's not finished, but we are really getting there, and we could really start to visualise what was going to happen next. So this is some bamboo that I put together on boards to then secure to the ceiling, and I used a combination of no nails and then actual nails from my nail gun, making sure of course that I avoided the wiring by using nails that were just about long enough but wouldn't pierce all the way through. So these bits of bamboo separate the rolled flat bamboo that's already up there, just to give that extra decorative element to it. And then I surrounded each section with a really small run of bamboo just to really finish it off and neaten up the ceiling, and I think it looks really lovely. I'm really pleased with how it's turned out. It's become almost a feature in its own right now. So yeah, I'm pleased that we spent the extra effort, although my back by the end of it was absolutely killing me. The next step, really, when the matting went on, transformed the bar from what still felt like very much a building site into what we recognise as something really warming and comforting and recognisable as Tiki. So I used the abaca mat from Little Grass Shack. It arrived from Europe, which is where they're based now, mainland Europe. I think they're in Spain or France. So I laid the matting out on the floor and marked the lines that I needed to cut, and I was able to use only 2 rolls of the abaca matting to do the entire top half of the bar walls. So the masking tape is really useful for two reasons. First of all, it gives me a really good straight line to follow, but second of all, it keeps all of those little raw edges from fraying whilst you're cutting it and putting it in place. So a million staples later, the matting was up on the wall, and what I do is I just move the matting slightly out of the way, staple underneath it, and then move that section back so it hides most of the staples, although I will need to go back and double check it just to make sure that none are on display. So moving on to our light feature, the Kursed Piranha. I was so proud of my partner. It was the first time that he'd ever cut a circle using his jigsaw, and he did a pretty good job of it. So we wanted to put this skeleton piranha fish into this recessed light feature with a porthole style light over the front of it and make it look like it was peering into the bar from outside and make it all a little bit eerie, a little bit creepy looking. I'd seen the idea online. I was really inspired to create my own. So taking that particular board down, placing it on the floor, I was then able to suspend the skeleton of the fish by putting a little eyelet in the back of the board and using clear thread to suspend the piranha skeleton from the top of the circle. Once that was in place, I then moved on to finding a bit of boarding that would go right behind the fish when everything was all put back together. And I painted it black just to keep it quite neutral. For me, the impact was about the lighting and the stuff in the foreground itself. So I decided on the background itself to use some UV resin and just do a few dots which looked like air bubbles coming out of the fish. Then on the bottom half of the circle, I stapled some plants out of our aquarium that we didn't need anymore. So we kind of put the lights in place first halfway up the wall, and then we were able to pull them through and further up so that they were around the blackboard that I put in place, and were able to light the fish without us really being able to see the lights from the recess. We then popped the board back out onto the wall and stapled the matting around it, making sure everything was secure, everything was in place, and that we hadn't trapped any of the lights or the cables. And then once that was done, I looked at the surround for the actual porthole itself, and it was black plastic. So the first thing I did was I scuffed it just to make sure that I could get some keying for the paint that was going to go on it. I wanted it to look more like this octopus arm light fitting that I've also bought for the bar. So the first thing I did was I stippled the entire thing in black and brown paint as a bit of a base, and also I think the stippling, it kind of gives that rusty effect, and I knew then that the metallic paint that I put on afterwards would probably adhere to it a little bit better than if it had just been smooth. So once that was done, I covered it in the gold powder that I have, and then a little bit of the bronze as well, just so that it didn't look too flat. And I gave it a good coat of clear varnish once it had finished, made sure it was all dry, of course, and then I was able to fit it in place. I still need to change the screws. I don't think that I've got the right screws. I need to cover them somehow, but apart from that, I'm really pleased with how this light looks. The only thing we're trying to decide at the moment is whether to leave it on this sort of tealy green or whether to have the full sort of spectrum of colours running through the background. It was then back to some more mundane bits and pieces, so staining the kickboards or the skirting, and also cutting the lengths of dado rail that I'm going to be carving in episode 3. I've started to put in place some of the bamboo roll that we've been varnishing, or certainly my mum has come over to varnish. There'll be more of that in the next episode, which we're really excited about putting together. But at the moment, we've got lots and lots of bits to finish off. I've already started to put some of the pictures up, but again, it was to clear a box, and I'll go through a little bit more about that next time. I've also been cutting the bamboo, which will form a backsplash or a splashback, depending on where in the world you live and what way around you put those two words. There'll be more of that in episode 3, as well as a lot more of the finishing touches and getting this bar up and ready to sit and drink our cocktails in. So make sure you like and subscribe, and please make sure you come back and join me for the next episode.